And so my annual Christmas tradition comes to a close. Or does it? This is the last Home Alone movie we can calculate the trap physics of. There are no more, or at least there were no more. In a stunning turn of events, earlier this year Disney announced that they were rebooting Home Alone, which means hopefully next year I'll have more traps to calculate. Right now, though, we dissect the final traps of the original franchise by looking into Home Alone 5, The Holiday Heist. The pattern goes something like this. People love the original and the second film all these years later. Some people hate the third one for trying to be something it's not, but for those who see through and realize it simply isn't meant to be a Home Alone film, they do realize it has quite a decent plot as well, and easily some of the best traps ever. The fourth film is undeniably hated unanimously, but it still has a somewhat unique concept and its own mildly interesting moments. The fifth one is a wild card, and people seemed to ignore its existence after the bomb that was taking back the house. But to be honest, the film is in a similar position to Home Alone 3. It is not as good as Home Alone 3. Home Alone 5 is like a TV special or something, but it suffers from the same problem, being that it never should have been called a Home Alone film. I suppose the usage of sort of traps would have made it accused of copying though, so they named it what they did. There are barely any traps, however, as we'll momentarily see. While watching, it can almost be cringy at times, but it's still quite funny at other moments, and has a generally modern feel, with some of the funnier bad guys in the franchise. It's just okay overall, and so today, we analyze the remainder of this franchise's booby traps. Hello, I'm the Theorizer. Let's start here with this barbell thing hitting our two goofy bandits' legs. This will be a wild approximation for technical reasons. No fear, I will have a range that should give a solid answer of mortality regardless. This barbell defies likely friction and travels around 6 feet in exactly 0.53 seconds. This means it is traveling at 3.45 meters per second. It hits their legs and slows in a mere 0.1 seconds. This means it decelerates at 34.5 meters per second. This barbell weighs less than what I calculated Home Alone 3's out to be, but more than, I'd say, at least 100 pounds. Converting to kilograms and multiplying this mass by our previously calculated acceleration, we calculate it to hit their legs with a force in the range of 1,500 to 5,000 newtons. If it's at the lower end of that scale, it could break their tibia a little if all of that was compressed on one leg, but assuming it is dispersed upon all four of their legs, it would have to be at way higher end of that scale to do much damage, and still, it wouldn't actually kill them like this. They couldn't move on, but no death here. Next, we have the pendulum stocking of coal. This one was odd. I seemed to have a blind spot since my last physics video was so long ago. I consulted my notes and took quite a while, but after fixing my knowledge of pendulums and trigonometric forces, I think I managed. I measured the stocking. It is composed of what roughly equates to a cylinder and hemellipsoid. Using the volume formulas for each of those shapes and measuring the stocking by comparing it to her face, we see that it's around 785 cubic inches of coal, packed at a lesser density, so I'll go on the extreme low end, which gives us 31 pounds or 14 kilograms. Sounds about right, actually. But now, the trickier part. I had to reconstruct my memory a bit, which is odd because I always used to tinker with pendulum physics. In the end, I timed the rough time this stocking takes to swing halfway down, which is about a quarter of its period, which can therefore be converted into an estimated length of the string holding the stocking up, about 3/4 of a meter. This allows us to involve more trigonometry to calculate the distance the pendulum vertically drops, which we can merge with the length and throw into one of the fundamental kinematic equations to receive the velocity it smacks her with, which is, sensibly enough, around 1.8 meters per second. It takes 1/10 of a second to slow down after hitting her face, which means its deceleration is just under 2 Gs, which merging with the mass gives us a whacking force of over 250 newtons, or about 57 pounds. That sounds very mediocre, actually. I'm not too sure that's enough to really severely concuss her. Maybe it could loosen a tooth a tiny bit. Very unlikely to be full-on deadly. When she falls backwards, that too is not done in a lethal landing manner, so still nothing. She'd once again, however, probably be incapacitated. This next one was weird. At first, I wanted to use the plastic deformation of the garage door to calculate the velocity of these balls, but then I realized no. Did the math, did the calculus, did the problem, but in the end kept getting haywire answers due to the ambiguity of the cinematographers, and I don't want to run a simulation of this, so I'll do it in a very, very ballpark and pathetic way. This ball takes a few frames of video to go from here to here a couple feet. This is 5.2 meters per second, and considering that Hughes has around a centimeter to slow into his skin, or maybe a single frame of film, well, the basic momentum, energy, and force formulae suggest that the range of this force is between 25 and 220 newtons, or based on the cross-sectional area of the, I'm assuming, billiard balls-ish, approximately 2 to 16 psi, which is not enough to pierce the skin, break the bone, or severely crack the tooth. So bam, not deadly, just bruised a bit. Lots of instantaneous pain. Next up is this one. This absolute goof gets herself stuck in a window when our trap setter closes it. She reaches for a chair and surprise, it triggers a volume of, I think, tar. Well, whatever it is, it doesn't appear to be very hot or very calculable or really much of anything. This percolator thing doesn't even drop. What a waste of a perfectly good trap. The next one can be calculated, but it's yet again so obviously survivable. This film may just be the most realistic Home Alone. The old guy fiddles with a doorknob and it topples down the door onto a first-class lever with a bowl of suspicious holiday liquid on the other side. I want to calculate this quickly because I'm desperate, and this involves more engineering formulae which I find particularly enjoyable. So a new question for this trap. Would it even hit him? So to figure out the distance the presumed eggnog would go flying, we need to know the speed it's being fired at. To figure out the speed, we need to know how hard this seesaw is flinging it, and by extension how hard the door slams into this end. To know the door's landing force, we need to know how fast it's slamming down at, which can only be found using the potential energies conservation over from the energy of its rotation, which needs to be found using a wonderful engineering concept known as the moment of inertia. This can only be found once we measure the door plotted on a highly unintuitive axis and calculate its weight using the science behind door construction. Is it worth it? Comparing the door to Malcolm McDowell, we find that it's approximately 7.5 feet tall, 3/4 of a meter wide, and a couple inches thick. Converting and calculating this equals 0.111 cubic meters. The door's density is highly variable, but after lots of estimating density multiplication, factoring the little windows and looking up various door structures which took hours, I finally came to the conclusion that it can weigh anywhere from between 30 and 100 kilograms, leaning much further toward the low end of that spectrum. The moment of inertia is essentially the mass's shiftiness when rotating, and for a fairly dense cuboid such as this door, the formula looks like this. We have the measurements, and working with the mass solutions, we find our moment of inertia. Nope, wrong, the door doesn't flip around its center like an anti-gravity revolver, which is what this formula accounts for. Instead, it hinges around the base, which means we need to change the center of mass with the parallel axis theorem. Adding that in, we have our true moment of inertia, which, when we plop under the rotational kinetic energy formula, allows us to complete the rest of it and rearrange over to the conserved potential energy, which winds up revealing its velocity the door lands at, the number being, regardless of which mass the door truly has, approximately 4.11 meters per second. The door slows as it slams onto the first-class lever over the course of over half a meter. This means the force of it landing is between 500 and 2,000 newtons. This end is slightly shorter than the other end of the lever, so measuring and accounting for that, the force being exerted on the other side is slightly less. The glass bowl containing the eggnog has a mass of this formula times the density, and after measuring the fucking bowl through my computer screen, I came to the conclusion that it weighs around a whopping 10 pounds, and the eggnog inside I also measured using the density of milk to be much, much less than those 10 pounds, but regardless, we add them together, multiply by gravity, and have the counterforce to the lever's launch. It's not too much, and the eggnog would still go flying at said new net force. Reverse engineering the kinetic energy, we find that the eggnog would go flying 45 degrees at a speed of roughly 35 meters per second, which means after quadratic formulating the position kinematic formula into this big-ass projectile equation and neglecting air resistance due to the fact that I did the calculus and it was a pathetic waste of time due to eggnog not conforming to any normal aerodynamic method, we get a splash zone of 50 meters, which means not only would this definitely hit him, but it would likely splat all over the ceiling and actually probably hurt. Then again, what a waste of several hours. Because it appears as though this so-called stunt was actually performed, there is minimal editing, and they even forgot to remove the saran wrap from the other shots in post-production. They actually sent it splattering, and thus I can conclude pointlessly that this is correct, but not deadly. Next! Not deadly, not deadly, not deadly. They even land on the snowbank in the end. This would, in the manner it is done, most likely just bruise them, or at worst cause a little crack in a bone here or there. No way to calculate, and of course the slingshot to the butt is also not deadly. How hard does the ammunition whack dat ass, though? Watch my previous slingshot video for that answer. These two then fall through the window in a very non-calculable way, in a very survivable way. They then endure some more traps that are basically practical jokes. Nothing to analyze, nothing to kill. Good lord, give me something here. We see Sinclair swing from a Christmas light string. Okay, comparing the string to the house, it's 10 feet, which, using the pendulum formulae from before, means he swings midway at a velocity of 7.75 meters per second. The only thing that could happen is getting scratched along the side of the house, or literally, exactly bang on, the exactly 2 Gs he experiences might be, felt? Not deadly. Even at max, just thrilling, but he's old, so it might spook him? No. Sinclair then also falls down the stairs after being spooked again. Again, this is a little hard to calculate, there is no real way, but last year I gave French Stewart a 0.5 on the death counter for falling similarly down a staircase, so I'll permit that here too. Finally, the only true or deadly trap against the bad guys that remains, I suppose, is the neighbor kid launching an ice ball at Jessica's head and then encasing her in a snowman. Would she be KO'd? Would she freeze to death? Dense snow is dense. Measuring the ball, it's 0.43 kilograms and goes at 2.73 meters per second, hitting her with 24 newtons, which would again only hurt. It's a lot though. It's stiff. The snowman would have chilled her in the night, but she wouldn't have died in the fairly short yet impressive time span that it took the neighbor kid to build that snowman. For good measure, I'll give all these traps one more 0.5, which ultimately means a total of 1 of these burglars probably should have died during this film. That is, if they honestly tried to keep going after their prior injuries. Very realistic, very light traps though, so it's meh. Overall, 1 person could have died. Could have. Way less than the previous films, as you can clearly see. I had to speak fast because there was a lot of script. If the reboot isn't out next year, I'll do a lore theory or two. God knows I have plenty of ideas, like Old Man Marley being Kevin's Ghost of Christmas Future and Kevin being his Ghost of Christmas Past. Or I'm pretty sure the old woman being Mr. Duncan's ex. They're theories I've had for ages now. I finally have to put them into a video, but physics, though. This was exhausting. Until next time, I'm the Theorizer. Merry Christmas!